Are you drawn to certain styles that feel dark and eerie but a little feral, a little animalistic? Are you drawn to things that are imperfect, ripped? Then perhaps you want to incorporate a bit more werewolf or lichen details into your own personal style. My name is Melissa of Silky Mochi, and in today's video we are going to be talking about taking inspiration from the idea and concepts that is the werewolf or lichen. But for the most part I'm going to be using the term werewolf. And if you're new here, I have a system or a series called the Dark Muses, and it includes vampire, witch, siren, haunted doll, and fairy. And one of the most common, and I kid you not, I get it at least like once a week, the most common comment I get is, why isn't werewolf one of the dark muses? So we are gonna dive into that because I actually have a reason why werewolf is not one of the dark muses, but it does not invalidate werewolf being not a good source of inspiration. It is. Let's dive into that first, and then we'll dive into very specific imagery, inspirations, garments, and fabrications and silhouettes that take inspiration from the idea and spirit that is the werewolf. Okay, so let's take a step back and talk about the archetypes of the dark muses that I have curated. So with vampire, witch, siren, haunted doll, and fairy, when I first curated this series, my main goal was I wanted some sort of system of sorts that revolve around dark aesthetics. There are a lot of systems out there that exist that beautifully curate and categorize style in a way that helps us, especially those of us who have a bit of an unorganized mind, or those of us who get a little bit of joy from things that are neatly packaged. So I wanted something like that before dark aesthetics. I am obsessed and I have this immense deep love, things that have a hauntingly beautiful aspect to them. And so the Dark Muses is my love letter to dark aesthetics. But I needed a way to describe these without being too specific in terms of it relying on celebrities, movies, or anything that is too specific. I also didn't want it to be overcomplicated, and I specifically wanted it to narrow down to 5 and be pretty strategic about what that 5 is. And the biggest thing is why werewolf is not one of the dark muses. I didn't want any of the muses to be redundant or repetitive of one another. Okay, so let me walk you through my thought process of how I went about pretty much choosing these 5 as being the main 5. Now, one thing that I want everyone to keep in mind, and I feel like I have not properly iterated this, but when it comes to the dark muses, it's not meant to be taken literally. Whenever you think about the idea of a vampire or a fairy or a witch, there are so many iterations. But the idea of these were meant to be archetypes that is essentially kind of like the header, the headline, the main being or model figure that encapsulates certain keywords that describe a certain dark aesthetic. Because I did not want to, like, let's say if I'm talking about a style, if I talk about Lolita styles, the Lolita subculture is actually very specific. There are rules. There are very specific things that relate to Lolita. So if I want to talk about this certain inspiration, I can't be all like, oh, this Lolita style, because it may not be Lolita. Or romantic goth. Romantic goth is another style that comes from the goth subculture, and it comes with certain aspects that is really hard to go around, and there are people who are like diehard about it. So I wanted vague entities, and I landed on these 5. I wanted a style that encapsulates the idea of rich, luxuriousness, maximalist, and essentially the idea of a dark aesthetic that is extra and designer and couture. What dark being encapsulates that the best? Vampire. Vampires tend to be older beings that most likely have collected riches. And I know so many people want to associate vampire with that of more modern styles like they see in Vampire Diaries or Twilight. But that's where I say you can't take these dark muses so literally. The idea of vampire, it's an archetype. It encapsulates the rich, luxurious look of dark aesthetics. Now for witch, I was more so like thinking of like what is the most natural, in tune with nature, because there's a lot of styles that are free, flowy. A lot of people want to call it boho chic, but I kind of want to step away from that. I don't actually like using the word boho chic, but there are darker styles that have that look and feel of, that has that whimsy. And that is where witch and warlock come in, where it's things that are natural, rugged, a little ripped up, a little imperfect, and it is one with nature. And this is where werewolf fits in, which I will get back to. Siren is the dark aesthetic that is minimal. This is where corporate goth fits in, minimal alternative fits in. The siren aesthetic is meant to be this idea of this subtly sultry being. The haunted doll, I literally was thinking of those styles that are cute but creepy. I needed an entity that encapsulated the idea of a dark aesthetic without it being all wearing all black or having this heaviness to it. The haunted doll is meant to be this lighter counterpart to it all. And then fairy is meant to be the colorful, experimental, fun, playful, pattern-centric dark aesthetic. And that's why I look to the 2000 emo styles or Vivienne Westwood. It's this idea of you can still be colorful whilst it's still feeling unsettling, dark, and alternative. Okay, so going back to why werewolf isn't one of these 5 archetypes is because when I think of werewolf, and I'm sure a lot of people do, we think of many things. We think of obviously fur. We think of ripped up button-up clothes because we're picturing like the original Wolfman from Universal movies where he's just transformed. He has like ripped up clothes. So the werewolf idea will probably have like this rugged look, this natural, animalistic, and feral feel. And that's the thing. The idea of natural, feral, animalistic, furs, moon talismans, that is already existing in the Dark Muses under witch and warlock, this magical being. And I think we don't need to include werewolf as one of the 5 muses, but think of werewolf as a extending branch of the witch archetype. So werewolf is still a valid dark aesthetic. It just doesn't need to be one of the 5 muses because it branches off from what the roots of witch is. As I talk throughout the video, there is a difference between werewolf and lichen. So I have it screenshotted here. So technically, in fiction, lichens tend to be the shapeshifters that have control of their shapeshifting. I immediately think of obviously the lichens of Underworld. I also think of, if you ever play Skyrim, you have the ability to be a lichen. So like there's a certain button you press and you like turn into a wolf on command, but it's that typical werewolf body where you have that strength and that like you become a werewolf essentially. Whereas werewolf itself, you don't have control of that transformation. It's normally triggered by a full moon, which is traditionally what we see, but there's other iterations too, such as in Greek mythology where it's the transformation happens upon Zeus or some other ritual. And I think that's what's so interesting too about werewolf is that unpredictability. And I think that's a key word to keep in mind when dressing for the werewolf. Okay, so again, the werewolf keywords and the style details that would be associated with werewolf really do cross over with witch and warlock. So some of the imagery and keywords do cross over with witch, but that's okay. It still has very specific ones that make it particular to werewolf. Whenever it comes to any style or aesthetic, I actually find it really helpful to list out keywords that you want to go for. It's kind of like manifesting the idea and aura you want to give off. Some keywords that I personally would incorporate are feral, bones, wolf, canine motifs, rugged and imperfect, animalistic, ritualistic, moon imagery, for obvious reasons. I also think of collars, not just the button-up collars, because every time we see an imagery of a wolf man who's just transformed, he's in a button-up, and no, I mean like dog collars or like metal chokers, not to be confused with the weird tradwife collar thing going on right now. Don't be confused with that. In terms of fabrication, like the witch and warlock dark muse, I would associate werewolf with natural fibers. The obvious being fur. There's a lot of beautiful vintage fur that is existing out there. There's also some great faux fur coats. Some of my favorite is from Foxblood. We have a lot of ripped linens, ripped denim, like this idea that creates this stringy, like very, like it just got ripped out because you just transformed, right? I also think of gauze. I think gauze, linens, things that have this natural look to it. I also think of ruined suiting. I think it's a great fun idea is going to the thrift store and buying like vintage blazer suits or button-ups and ripping it yourself and like adding safety pins or resewing it or doing some kind of quilting pattern on it. When it comes to every werewolf iteration that I'm gonna go over, the idea of claws is like a fun aspect of making it feel a bit more wolf-like, a bit more animalistic. I think that's like the biggest one I'm going to be repeating is animalistic and feral, and it's this addition to certain dark aesthetics that give it a bit more feralness. Also, when it comes to the idea of a werewolf, it's a bit rock and roll because traditionally whenever we think of rock and roll as a culture, it is a little sweaty, it's a little like rugged, they are on tour, they're doing their own thing, it's very rebellious, it's not cut and clean. And I think when it comes to incorporating werewolf into different dark aesthetics, it's that idea of like the origins of rock and roll, the rock star girlfriend, like why are those so appealing? And I think werewolf comes hand in hand with that. Okay, so we have the 5 dark muses as a baseline, and you can branch off, right? So werewolf naturally fits into the witch keywords. We have natural fibers, we have this feral aspect, this natural free spirit type of deal, right? But I feel like werewolf incorporated in other ways can also be very interesting and really fun. So when I think of the dark muse vampire as an archetype and how to incorporate werewolf into that is still you have this wealth, this riches, this maximalist look, things that feel a bit couture. So when it comes to werewolf, inevitably you're gonna have like these rich furs, things that feel a bit animalistic, like that's a keyword we want to keep up. Incorporate aristocratic furs. Picture like these conceptual fur coats that you see on runway. Think of heavy jewelry, this refined beast look. I also think of this idea of the werewolf as the vampire archetype being like the vampire hunter or like the vampire foil. So it still has this maximalist rich look, but it's a bit more feral and animalistic. So a bit rock and roll mixed in with these riches. That's also where the werewolf in London also fits in. Like when the werewolf is mid-transformation, he was wearing these brocade vests, these high-end cotton button-ups, but it's a bit ripped up. So you have this beautiful juxtaposition of rich layers with things that feel very imperfect. So I also think this is where play with gold jewelry comes in. I do show a lot of silver jewelry, which is ironic considering the silver bullet tends to be what like ends the life of a werewolf. So I think mixing gold and silver jewelry would be a beautiful aesthetically, but if you want to be accurate, then maybe stay away from the silver jewelry. But I still think it beautifully still pertains to the werewolf aesthetic. Now when it comes to witch and warlock, in terms of the werewolf, where they really cross over is obviously a lot of things, but really honing in on this idea of a shapeshifter. I'm also thinking of this look being very post-transformation of being a werewolf. So you have you're back in your human form, so you have that ripped up clothes already on you. You're a bit one with the wolf. So you're gonna have these moon and bone talismans adorned on you and kind of like taking pride as this being of a werewolf, so maybe more lichen-like. I also think smeared up makeup. I feel like when it comes to the idea of werewolf, you're not gonna have like cut and clean makeup. It's going to be a little messy. And that already naturally goes with what I've already talked about when it comes to the witch as a dark muse. I think of also distressed leathers. When it comes to the coloration of werewolf, I think these dirty browns or brown peeking under black is also very werewolf-like. These raw leathers, these iron, like raw iron looking metalwork. I also think of Gabriel Van Helsing. Like the whole Van Helsing movie is just like a great prototype for warlock fashion, but also mixing that in with the werewolf aesthetic. I think also if you want to take a bit more of a modern take, but still upholding the werewolf mixed in the warlock, is ripped up jeans, ripped up cargos or khakis, and maybe like splattering paint that looked like you were going through muddy dirt. I think also alchemy sigils or ritualistic symbols. When it comes to the furs, I think of King of the North type of furs where it's like draped over you, kind of like lazily draped over you. It's not like a perfect fur coat where you're like, it's like kind of just like an add-on because it's like one with your outfit. I don't know if that makes any sense. But I feel like when it comes to dressing for witch or warlock, but making it feel a bit more werewolf or more lichen-like, is really amplifying that feralness, that animalistic nature, and really owning those like moon sigils and fur lining, fur detail. Okay, now when it comes to Siren as a dark muse, but incorporating werewolf aspect into the Siren, I think of more so taking a goddess of the wolves type of look to it. So like I said at the beginning of this video, we are not going to be focusing too much on different werewolf or lichen media, but more so creating your own story, so you're not being a copy paste of certain werewolf movies. We are world building, because when it comes to creating your own style, it's storytelling, but it's your story. So let's say you like the Siren look, but there's something so seductive about this idea of incorporating werewolf. So I think of the goddess Artemis, since Artemis is obviously associated with the moon, but also associated with wolves. So it's like this beautiful mix that does incorporate the lichen lore as well as Siren, because it's this sleek, it's this elegant look. I also think of claws, but like a French tip, but in a claw form, kind of like a Catwoman, the way Zoe Kravitz did Catwoman. Her manicure, but more curved and a bit sharper, makes it feel a bit more canine. I also think of peeps of fur, so done so in like a designer way, versus the witch warlock route was a bit more rugged. The Siren type of fur is like it's warming you. It's a bit more elegant. I also think of this idea of like Queen of the Lichen, so you can go for like this Greek goddess look, or you could just think of this like very chic type of queen of wolves type of look, if that makes any sense. And somewhat underworld chic. So I always associate underworld with the Siren look, because like I said, we're not taking the dark muses are not meant to be literal. Siren is meant to be the archetype figure for things that feel chic, sleek, subtly sexy, and that's why most of underworld fashion is under the Siren look. Okay, so when it comes to Haunted Doll, I called this version Wolf in Sheep's Clothing, because you have this idea of something feral and a little bit dangerous, but you still have that soft femininity that is the Haunted Doll. So when it comes to the Haunted Doll, instead of distressed furs and leathers or cotton button-ups, when it comes to the Haunted Doll, I think it'd be like a fun way to go about it is ripped up laces, ripped up ruffles. You can also get like faux sheep fleece, like it mimics that curly texture that you see on sheep. So you can play around with those kinds of textures as well, and mixing it in with that feralness, that animalistic fur nature of the werewolf. I also think of tea-stained pastels. So normally when it comes to Haunted Doll, I always talk about beiges, creams, very light colors. Anytime light color is incorporated in your dark aesthetic, you do lean a bit more in that Haunted Doll look. But when you're incorporating a bit of werewolf in it, it's going to be a bit more stained. I also think of unkempt dolly lashes. So like you have like these doll-like eyelashes, but they're a little imperfect. They're a little out there. I also think wild eyebrows that are super like bushy and shaped upwards, like you were just like pre-transformation. I also think bone memorabilia mixed in with these cute dolly silhouettes can also be that great mix of Haunted Doll and werewolf. Okay, so when it comes to fairy and incorporating werewolf into the fairy archetype, it's going to be a bit more colorful, and I think this is where very modern iterations of werewolf comes in, like the 1980s Teen Wolf, or more recently in Wednesday we have Enid Sinclair where she has her rainbow claws. I also think of iterations of pastel goth, because when it comes to pastel goth, there's a bit of this like imperfection. We're coming out of the early 2000s scene and emo era, so you have a bit of like this like the haircut, I forgot what it was called, even though I was there, but there's a very specific scene haircut. So you have like your striped ends, you have leopard print colors. So pastel goth is when it starts to soften, and of course you get pastel colors. And I think pastel goth had a bit of that feralness that was from the scene era that kind of somewhat incorporates like that colorful monster look. And that's what I think of when it comes to fairy and werewolf. It's like this colorful, fun monster. Again, colorful furs, those fuzzy cardigans that are in vibrant colors. And then when you mix it in with these pastel or colorful claws, there's something animalistic but also cartoony in a way, and it mixes that werewolf and fairy aspects. I also think of the movie Ginger Snaps, again, a modern iteration of the werewolf aesthetic. But you also have a mix of like these colorful garments and fun silhouettes, and also peeps of color in the hair. One of the reasons why I waited so long to make a video about a werewolf dark aesthetic video was because I knew at some point I was going to go to Epic Universe, which would inevitably have werewolf inspiration, imagery, and a ride. And I did get to go in June, and I will have more videos to come on that, specifically in my Frankenstein and creature feature video that will come later. Disappointingly, actually, at Epic Universe, the werewolf section was actually quite minimal. There were definitely hints of the idea of like the old like werewolf movies in old Hollywood and old horror movies, but it wasn't as prevalent as I thought it would be, and maybe it's because I hyped it up. But there is a werewolf ride. I don't want to spoil it too much, but there is a werewolf ride. The entrance to the werewolf ride like is really cool. I'll put it here, and there are some werewolf related merchandise. What was interesting about werewolf media and the depiction that was shown here is that when it comes to werewolf movies, there are so many ways to go about this. Werewolf that was shown at Epic Universe in Universal Studios, like fortune teller type of imagery that was associated with the werewolf ride. And also, of course, there was like actual like posters of the original werewolf movie on hoodies and t-shirts. I'm gonna be honest, like I really think I understand, like especially if you are a lover of the idea of werewolf lore and lichen lore. A lot of people were disappointed with Epic Universe's interpretation of that, and I hope they expand more on it. It is still new. I feel like Epic Universe will be a lot more exciting if you're like fans of vampires and Dracula and Frankenstein. Like that lore is very heavily influenced in that. But I still had a lot of fun at Epic Universe. I just, that was like my biggest complaint was I feel like they could have expanded more on the werewolf part. If you watched this whole video, thank you so much. I hope everything made sense. I kind of went on a tangent here and there, but I just get really excited when it comes to style, fashion, and the little details that can be incorporated into your personal style. Also, in conclusion, long story short, Werewolf is not a dark muse of the 5 because it coincides and would become redundant with what is the witch or warlock. Natural, feral, rugged, imperfect layers, and natural fibers. I hope you have a great week. Until next time, bye.